right, as promised, I'm going to answer some questions that some of my commenters have asked. If you have more questions, we can do this again, maybe once a month, I think. Seems to be the right timeline for this. But we got some great questions about tattoos, about subjectivity and objectivity, about Loki and Crom, all kinds of good questions. So let me just get into them right away. The first question had to do with the video that I did with my professor in Jiu-Jitsu, Tyler. And I just put that out recently. If you haven't had a chance to look at that interview yet, Tyler's a really great guy, really positive guy. He talks a lot about gratefulness and what a joy it is to coach and teach people. And someone commented, it was kind of a random comment, but I actually get this question a lot. I know there's something out there about this, is that someone asked me, why tattoos? Because there's two guys sitting on a mat and we both are covered in tattoos. And to start with, we were both tattoo artists. That's something that Tyler and I have in common. So tattoo artists generally have tattoos. In fact, you usually end up starting tattooing yourself. I have tattoos on my legs from tattoo school. But I also think tattoos maybe are a generational thing. I mean, I'm from the 90s. There was a whole period where a lot of people were getting tattoos, and I mean, my first one was an armband, because that's what you got in the 90s, right? I got my first tattoo when I was 21 years old. And once you have a few tattoos, you're kind of committed to being a tattooed person. You know, they're really expensive to remove, and you know, the process isn't that great, as I'm finding out, because I'm trying to have one removed right now. But there's a certain look to being a tattooed man, and that's an aesthetic. It's not everyone's aesthetic, but it's something that appealed to me when I was younger. And now, if I had to go back, because now I've spent all this time working out and trying to look a certain way, and obviously that visually that constrains my options. And I hate it when people get all their tattoos, they get filled up before they're 30 years old. Well, man, I have tattoos that I'm like, well, that really doesn't mean anything to me anymore. But it meant something to me at the time. And so you want, I think, your tattoos to be a story of your life that's on your body. And a point I always make about this is that, and I don't want to make it a positive or negative, but men, for men with less money, tattoos are something that no one can take away from you. They're on your skin. They are part of you. I talk a lot about meaning and how important it is that we create meaning. And tattoos are a way to kind of define your identity, to say what's important to you. There's a mythic element to it. People put animals that inspire them on them all the time. I mean, that's most of the classic tattoos are like eagles and serpents and things, these timeless symbols. So there's a very kind of Jungian symbolic element to tattoos that I think is very interesting. But also, it can just be an aesthetic. As a tattoo artist, years ago, you get all these clients and they have all these ideas about what their tattoos mean. And one of my favorite answers that anyone gave me, some guy came in and said, I want wolf with a dagger through its head. And I said, why? What does that mean? And he's like, because it's sick. And I was like, all right, good answer. Because sometimes you get tired of hearing about everybody's elaborate explanations for things. And sometimes the fact that he just thought it looked aesthetically cool is maybe enough. So I'm not really pro or anti-tattoo. I have a really good friend who's a tattoo artist, Clint, and he actually tattooed, he did the second run of this tattoo on my hand, And obviously that means something to me. That's something, obviously I work with symbols all the time. This is a symbol I created. And I created to symbolize the father in solar idealism. And so to have that on me is important. I would like to have some more of the symbols that we've created for the Order of Fire and solar idealism on me at some point, because I've already committed to being a tattooed man, so I might as well get some more tattoos, right? If I had it to do over, I would probably choose either not to get tattoos, or I would be very meticulous about using the same artist and the exact same tattoo aesthetic, because I've seen a lot of tattoos now. You know, when I first got my first tattoo, it was, like I didn't have this wide range of aesthetic options. And now I've seen enough tattoos that I know exactly the traditional style that I like, big fat lines. And there's an artist, I think, in Spain that has a very specific color palette that I like a lot. And if I was going to go that route, I'd have them all done over in that, or maybe just black and white. But I have the traditional tattoo patchwork style of tattoos, and that's what I've got. And so that's part of who I am and part of my life. Now, other men who maybe have more means, they tell their story of their lives through not their just deeds, because men of all classes can have deeds, but the wealthy display their personality and the things that they do by the companies that they built, or Ferrari or the house or whatever. But like I said, for a poor man, you can never take away his tattoos. You can never take away his tattoos. So I think that's there is a class issue there to a certain point, and that's why I think maybe wealthier people look down on tattooed people sometimes. But it's not always the case. I think for the right person, it's a cool look. I think they're a lot better on men than women. That's become a very popular sentiment on the internet. That tattooed women sometimes also mean women with problems. I don't know if that's always true, but I think there's a hardness when women are tattooed that isn't, not always. I've seen it done in a classy way, but it adds something a little gritty to women. Whereas men want lions and tigers and symbols of monsters and so forth on us. It's part of our initiatory experience and how we escape the womb or whatever. How we identify ourselves is by overcoming obstacles and monsters and fighting dragons and all that. So it makes sense that men would want to associate themselves with those kinds of things. Again, I'm not anti-tattoo or pro-tattoo. I happen to be tattooed. It's an individual choice. As a tattoo artist, formerly, I've had a lot of people say, I would get a tattoo, I'm just not sure what to get. And the answer to that is, then don't get a tattoo. Don't get a tattoo if you don't know what to get and you're worried about it, whether you're not going to like it later or whatever, then don't get one. Like, there's no obligation to get one. It doesn't make you cooler or more cool or less cool to have a tattoo, right? It's just something that you can do, and it's an option. But this actually flows into another question. Someone asked me about aesthetics. Let me read that. Let's see what we got here. Off topic, he said, could you talk a little bit about, in the next QA video, about the artistic side of your work, your approach to making the aesthetic, visuals, symbols, etc., unique, and communicate your ideas, and maybe some advice for others when it comes to creating a brand or an overall aesthetic in this way. Well, man, I can talk about aesthetics for hours, but what I would say about aesthetics, generally speaking, as a principle, it's about making visual things make sense. And there's, audio aesthetics and things like that too, and that's a different subject, but it's the same concept. It's about, do these things make sense together? Because all visual things are communication. So are you saying the same thing? Or are you putting things that match in a pleasing way? ideas that go together and somehow interact with each other in a pleasing way. And that's something you can only know by doing it. And you just get better at it, and you get a better sensibility for it. People develop an aesthetic sensibility over time. And that's through exposure. When you talk about people who have good aesthetic taste, the reason they have good aesthetic taste, generally speaking, is because they have exposure to a wide range of options. This is true with everything from, clothing to cars to guns, whiskey. You have someone with a refined palate. Guys who like whiskey can nerd out about some whiskey, and why do they know so much about whiskey? Well, they've been to distilleries and they've tried hundreds of kinds of whiskey, and so that they have a very distinctive palate, and they know exactly what kind of whiskey that they like. They know what they want in a whiskey because they've had all these options. So if you're going to have good taste aesthetically or bad taste, you have to know what your options are. And so the more refined your taste becomes more refined as you have more exposure to more options. So that's something to consider with aesthetics is that if you want to pick the right font, you have to look at 1,000 fonts. And you have to look at those fonts in context and understand what they mean. There are fonts that convey a meaning. And it's weird that fonts can do that, but they can. And as you start to get a really refined taste for them, you can look at a font and be like, that S isn't the right S for this word because it doesn't feel right. Because these visual things all make reference. They're all communicating something, right? So, and the same is true for everything. Like, I have a very distinctive style that I've developed. Why? Something that's pleasing to me. I've seen a lot of things. I originally went to school for fashion design. I know a lot about clothes. And, that doesn't mean, but what I wear has to convey the message of what I'm talking about. So I can't, it doesn't make any sense for me to talk about masculinity and philosophy and so forth and be wearing some kind of foofy outfit. Doesn't make any sense. It's not going to convey the message that I want to convey. So what is my selection? If you've seen I'm not wearing it right now, but you've seen the adventure shirt that I designed. And it's because I, tried a whole bunch of those shirts over years. I've probably spent $1,000 on different shirts that look like that over the years, and none of them were really right. So I designed the one that I wanted. But the adventure shirt itself, if you could call me anything, it would be probably some kind of gonzo philosopher anthropologist. Gonzo meaning non-professional. Gonzo meaning that I am professional, it is my job, but I'm not a scholar. I'm not doing it according to a certain way. I'm just doing it, gonzo, it's always a reference to, I'm blanking on his name. Why am I blanking on his name? But if you're living in Las Vegas. But yeah, it's a reference to some kind of some wild and crazy version of it. And that's I study masculinity in that way. I don't study it in this, at a university. But for me to, as this anthropologist character, having me wear something that looks like a safari shirt, it has like a little bit of an Indiana Jones vibe, but not over the top, but just a little reference to it there. It's not a suit. It's not something. There's a reference being made, and that's what this all is. It's all about references. So, are you saying the right thing? Are you communicating the right thing? The way that I pick what I'm wearing also has to do with, I feel, because of what I talk about. Because I talk about masculinity and action, and I feel like I should look like I could be able to do something. I can't be precious. I can't be like so refined that I look like I couldn't get dirty. Whatever I wear has to look like I could go jump. I could go jump and do something. I could go lift something. I could go pick something up. Like I'm functional. And you can have style and still be functional. And so I'm very meticulous about that kind of thing. And also, I mean, I think you have to love it, like anything else. Like, people are always complaining that our world is ugly now, especially, in the right, whatever that means. People are complaining, the world is all like, everything's cheap now, everything's garbage, like everything, is just put together really quickly. And you look at these old cathedrals and these old buildings and these old statues and oil paintings that took years to do, and all this stuff takes time and intention. And so, if you want to create something beautiful, you have to care about that yourself. You actually have to invest time in creating something beautiful, like it matters, and not just matter. So many men are trained, because it is a cultural thing. It doesn't have anything to do with masculinity. In fact, I think a lot of aesthetics has directly to do with masculinity, because it's a godlike action to take raw materials and reorder them the way that you want, the way that you think they look best. I mean, nature gives us just overgrown weed patches, and men mow it all down and make a garden. And then you go to France and make a formal garden. That someone drew on paper, and this is where everything's going to go, and it's going to come in this shape, and this is what's going to happen. That's like God action. That's that creative energy, and you can do that with everything. You can do it with cars. You can do it with guns. You can do it with, martial arts is a little bit that way at a certain level, but it's about redesigning things the way that you want. And okay, I'm in a room right here. Well, I could have taken any angle in this room to made the set for this, right? But there's something aesthetically that I'm trying to do, which I saw some videos saying, for more cinematic look to things, you should shoot into the sun, like shoot into the sunlight, which is counterintuitive to me, because I light everything like it's a still life. I light everything like it's a portrait, and I always have. And it works out well for me, and it's right for portraits. But so I decided to try this, and it's hard to do actually technically, because of the difference in exposure over here and here. So I had to set up a light right here. But I'm experimenting with this, and maybe this will turn out, maybe it won't turn out. Maybe it'll have a grain in it because of the exposure difference, and maybe I needed a bigger light right here to offset the sun. But that's something I'm playing with, and I'm just going to get better at it. Why? Because I care. You have to invest time in creating a more beautiful world if you want a more beautiful world. And that's why aesthetics, I think, are so important and so overlooked by men. Because men built this world. Men made all these beautiful things that you're talking about as historically. Men made all these things. And so it's about making a clear message, making a clear reference, so you're saying one thing, or you're saying things in harmony, like everything's, like an orchestra, like everything is working together, and one thing isn't competing with another way. It's like everything is working together in harmony, and that's what you're really looking for in any kind of aesthetic, anything kind of aesthetic practice. If you're trying to make something beautiful, you're creating harmony between things. So if you have something that just doesn't make sense in it, for whatever reason, you have to be able to be attuned to that. And so that's, if I was a different guy, I would have a different aesthetic. You can have just as much attention to having like a rocker aesthetic. Or obviously, I'm not a suit guy at all. But that's a whole rabbit hole that you can go down, and there are men who understand the difference between fabrics, and they're extremely refined. I could take a stab at it, but I wouldn't be as good as someone who really knows what they're doing, because that's not who I am. So I think it's about, my friend Tanner Guzzi, who obviously writes about style, he came up with this concept called Objectivity. And I wrote about something like this on my Substack as well in reference to him, is that you're whatever you're trying to communicate with your brand or who you are, you're manifesting that in an outward way. So there's harmony between who you are, who you say you are, who you want to be, and your outward appearance. An old friend of mine once said, and he had a wild look, but it made sense. He had a wild look because he said that he had all these body modifications and all these things done to him, and he said he wanted to make his outer appearance match his inner landscape. And that's the way you have to think. That's what aesthetics requires. That's what making things beautiful require, or just making things make sense, because not everything's beautiful. Things can be beautiful in an ugly way, or a dark way, or whatever. But it's just creating harmony between the message and the aesthetic, and that just requires a lot of attention to detail and knowledge of the options available. And that's why you get professionals for a lot of this stuff, because they know what's available. That's what you learn as you do this stuff over and over. So that's I would say how you create an aesthetic for who you are or a brand. It's like represent your ideas in a way that makes sense. And if you look like you're trying to be something that you're not, then that comes across too. And then you look like try hard or whatever. You look like you're faking it. And sometimes you have to fake it to bake it. But you want to keep things in harmony. Like you can't wear something that you could only wear if you were really jacked if you're not jacked. You have to make it make sense. And so I think that's really the heart of the aesthetics question, is creating harmony with the message and making sure all the elements work together in harmony to communicate that message. And that's kind of a philosophical way to approach aesthetics. Obviously, there are all kinds of details depending on what you're talking about in terms of design and so forth. But all these things are communication. They're forms of communication. So it's about getting the message lined up right. All right, next question. Someone asked, if you're a man who just moved to a new area with a few friends already there, how are some ways that you can build a tribe? Well, if you have a few friends there already, you already have a head start. Man, making friends as an adult man is a struggle. It's sometimes, I guess it helps, I think, if you have kids, because a lot of adult men have kids, and then so you meet them at kid things. That's what men have time to do, is they have time to do things with their families. So that's where a lot of men meet, and then maybe they go on a hunting trip or whatever together. But I think that it's really challenging because men are busy, they have family obligations, all that stuff. So you really have to intentionally create time to build friendships with men. But if you have a few friends already in your area, you have the start of a tribe. So that's great. But beyond that, I think you just have to put yourself in social situations. I'm not the best at that myself. I create a lot of what I do online. But then I end up, a lot of my friends are all around the world. So the people I talk to every day, the most, are, on different parts, literally on different continents. But ideally, I think you want something local. So I think when people talk about making a tribe, a lot of times they do get overly Dungeons and Dragons about it. They try to set up too much too quick. And it's not something that I've been very wary of, because I've been through this a few times with the Order of Fire. I try not to create new processes or new things unless people want them. Unless the guys want them and they develop organically, I think, I try not to do that, because you run into a problem where, you're just imposing this structure And I think, the way that men interact generally, I mean, you can impose a structure if you're all on the same page, but a lot of the things that you do have to develop because, hey, we all want this. Okay, let's do that. And that's, I think, how you can create that tribe. But I think a lot of it is, maintaining lines of communication and making sure you guys get together on a regular basis. And it kind of forms itself. I think if dudes actually want to be in a group of men and have friends, and that's a goal for all of them, they're going to make it happen. And if they aren't on the same page with that goal, it's not going to happen. So I think that you just have to be realistic about that. And if your friends don't want to do that, then you have to find guys that do. And it's a tall order. It's not easy, but that's worth doing. I think when guys join the Order of Fire's first men, they are looking for friends in their area, which I can't provide friends in every area, but they're looking for friends who share the same values. They're looking for other men who share the same values, and so if I can put them in touch with each other and actually just get them to talk. I know so many cool dudes, and the thing with the Order of Fire is like once you get these guys to talk, and once they meet, now they're friends, and then it's all real, and it's not on the internet anymore. That's why we do events, is then they all meet in person, and I'm like, okay, that guy, I really like that guy, whatever. Or I got along with that guy more than I did online, because people have different personalities online and offline. So, I mean, I think that face-to-face contact is so important, and, making that happen, I think is really important. So that's that question. Let's see. Someone said, do I believe that space travel is physically possible? I'm going to say yes. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to talk about it for a long time. But I will say, this is kind of an interesting question in that it makes you think about, like for instance, a lot of people are saying now how important circadian rhythms are. The androhumorins and whatever. What is it? How does that work when you're in space? Because all of that is rooted in the Earth. And we are creatures that evolved to be on planet Earth. And so we aren't really designed to be somewhere else. So there are probably going to be some failures in that, or like people try to account for everything, but they won't. Because there's so many unseen variables. Taking us off the planet in the same way that, people try to redesign society and then realize the parts that they forgot about. And that, which is, what we're going through with this big boomer experiment and the end of it. People try to redesign, the human world. They're like, oh, men and women can be equal and all this. And they, it doesn't matter that reproductive cycles don't matter. Like they just forgot that we're monkeys from Earth, and we have limitations, and our bodies do define what we are to a certain extent. So I think it would be interesting to see, maybe I'll see some in my lifetime of like, they've experimented with weightlessness and so forth. Obviously people have been to space. So it's something that, like I said, is beyond my technical expertise, but there will be unforeseen effects of it. So we'll move on to the next question though. Someone asked, is Crom still an inspiration to you? And that's because, coming back to tattoos, I have Crom on my knuckles, and I also wrote an essay called Crom for a book that I pulled out of print, Sky Without Eagles, just because some of the material was pretty outdated and would give people the wrong impression about what my ideas are right now. I'm pretty clear about what my ideas are right now, but you could go back and read something I wrote in 2012 or 2014 and get the wrong impression. And I really didn't want to deal with that. But the essay Crom was, I think, really me transitioning from being kind of a hardline atheist to being, exploring Germanic paganism. And like, Crom is like a middle step. Because Crom, the way he's described in the Conan movie, is basically a non-interventionist God. he's like an old grandpa who is this old awesome grandpa, which is kind of like Zeus, and that's kind of like Odin in a way. This old awesome grandpa that is really hard to impress, and they probably don't give a shit about you. But if you do something really impressive, they probably give you a little golf clap, and that's kind of the way that Crom is portrayed in the Conan movie. And I liked that idea, like the idea that if there's a god out there, do they care about you or not? And all that they care about, I think he says, you care about valor, something like that, something that means valor. Care about valor, like, well, okay, they only care about the great big gestures that men can do, not like there are a handful of gods who I'm thinking of one in particular that seems they want to be like Santa Claus, that knows you when you're sleeping, knows when you're awake, knows when you've been bad or good, like some god that cares about every stupid fucking thought that you have, every sinful thought or every idea that you have passed through your head. I can't imagine that a god that would give a shit about any of that. Never have been able to, never will. I think that is that is man's vanity. The idea that there is a super powerful being in the world that cares about your feelings every day is so vain, so obscenely vain. It's like billions of people on the earth, and somehow there's an omniscient God who cares about each and every person's thoughts and feelings and stupid, what they do. It seems absurd. But I do like the idea of a God who just only cares about the really important stuff. Well, if you did something impressive, I'll give you a little golf clap for it. It might help you out a little bit. I like that. So that's kind of the appeal, I think, of Crom. And like I said, it's very similar to Odin. Odin, somewhat the same way. Odin, you don't really know what he's up to a lot of times. And then I think in my system, in solar idealism, we pull all those ideas together. All these father figures become the one father archetype, the father God archetype, and that way he spans a wider breadth of human experience. But there is that is one good father archetype is the guy who looks down and might help you out if you try to do something really awesome. That's how I see Crom. So I think that we had a question about Loki, which was surprising. But someone asked, being Loki is a symbolism for light. Could he be a symbol of youth and life? Just like a kid, he is a prankster. And just like a kid, Thor, the adult, is always after him to solve the problems he created. The thing is, my response to that is just that, to my knowledge, Loki isn't a kid. So he would be an adult god who's responsible for his actions, which are sometimes malicious and at least foolish and put everyone else in danger. Is that something a kid would do? Yes, but I think that you're giving him a pass as a mythological figure if you don't acknowledge that he's supposed to be an adult. Because he's not presented as a little kid. If he was presented as a little kid, you could give him that, but he's not presented that way. So if you're going to talk about Loki, you have to talk about him as an adult god who, I think of it as, especially in societies where family is maybe a lot more important than it is to some people in the modern age, where family is everything, and someone's still in your family, even if they're constantly fucking up, they're constantly creating problems, they're still our clan, right? And I think that's maybe the way to look at someone like Loki, is that he's always creating trouble, always doing the wrong thing, just the black sheep of the family, but he's still one of them, so that's, I think, a better way to maybe look at him is like someone who they have to keep around, and they have to deal with what he does. And how many families have that? I mean, that's a very real thing. I mean, there's, your cousin so-and-so's in jail again, or the one, your brother just did this thing, and now we all have to be involved in it. There's one in every family, and sometimes it's a different person. People go through phases in life. Maybe someone who was always really good is now creating all the trouble. So maybe I think you can put it in that perspective. I think that I wouldn't give him a pass and call him, like, oh, you're just a crazy kid. I don't think as a god that's really what he represents. Let's see, we have a short question here. Someone asked which one of the tactical virtues is more important, strength or courage? And I'm not going to put a value on those, because it's, in terms of what's most important to you, it's usually the one that you lack. Because if you're really courageous, maybe you need to get stronger. If you're really strong, maybe you need to get more courageous. And they're all necessary to varying degrees, depending on who you are and your place in your tribe. So you need to be wary of all of that. And I mean, you need to be aware of all that. And, you could be, they can have, it's like a rock, paper, scissors game that never ends, where there's no real rules about who wins, because it just depends on the environment and what's going on. Because you can have guys who are, as strong and courageous as possible, and then you have some technology guy who's really good at something. He has mastery, and that's happening. I think in Ukraine right now. It's like, oh well, what good are all these warriors when you have like some nerd playing with sending drones over? That doesn't take strength or courage. And one could say maybe there's no honor in it, but we'll leave that for history to decide. But yeah, so I'm not going to put a value on any of those, any of the tactical virtues. All right, that question dovetails pretty nicely into another question, which someone asked. Is there anything that you would change now that you're older and have more experience? Is there anything you would change about the way of men? And my answer to that is that The Way of Men was the right book at the right time, and it was a very authentic expression of who I was at that time. I mean, I was a delivery truck driver when I wrote that book. And so the only thing that I would change is maybe the tone towards the end, because there's a lot of ranting about the modern world and the state of the modern world, and the world that I was inhabiting as like a blue-collar guy in the modern world. All those stuff that I was having to go through every day, all the indignities of employment and HR and all that stuff. But obviously that connected with men because they were all going through the same thing, and they're still going through the same thing, so it's not really outdated yet. I mean, there might be like some details that are different now, or it might just be worse. But if there was anything I would change, I would just kind of pull that out to make it more timeless. Because eventually some of that's going to be dated. Whereas I think the beginning parts of the Way of Men that really talk about the tactical virtues and the perimeter and so forth, those are timeless. Those are always true. Now the language might not be as accessible in 50 years, but those things are always true. And I continue to build on those concepts now with like Fire in the Dark, I think is an evolution of the same idea. The fire is at the center of the perimeter, and we use the fire to talk about meaning and order and the desire to create order in the world. So I think that's, I think my work is just an extension of The Way of Men. I did put out a 10th anniversary hardcover edition of The Way of Men, and in it, I did answer this question. I went through it and I added some notes that weren't there before, and I talked about, what I would say, what I would do differently. And it's basically what I just said, but at greater length and in more detail. So if you really want to know that, there's a hardcover edition. It has a full introduction by me 10 years after the fact. So I think that's kind of my statement that I want to make about that. And if anything, I've toyed with the idea of, in the way that in Fire in the Dark I created the myth of the first men, I've thought about mythologizing that further and making a bigger story that includes the things from the Way of Men, so it can almost be read as a myth and then be truly timeless. And that's what I would do with it. The only thing, like I said, the only thing I would really change about the Way of Men, I still agree with pretty much everything I said in that book. It would just be an issue of making it more timeless. And making sure that it doesn't get dated, making sure it's not, taking out the parts that are maybe me ranting about my life at that time, even though they were important and they were why the book was successful, because it was real and it connected with people. But for it to be timeless, maybe some of that would be refined or edited down. That's the only really thing I would change with that. See the next question here. Now this is interesting, but I'm going to make a short answer because someone I know did a long answer. Someone said, I'd be curious to read your take on how modern society values the objective over the subjective, ostensibly. He said, my own view is that the objective is valuable primarily as a means of evaluating the subjective, i.e., the engineering of the piano and the scientific application of music theory enables the creation of subjectively beautiful music that would otherwise be impossible. This could use some elaboration, but it's the germ of an idea. I'm going to keep this one short because it was the subject of an essay written by C.B. Robertson, who's in the Order of Fire and is one of the key thinkers, I think, of solar idealism. And he wrote an essay called Descending Odin's Throne, and it's all about objectivity versus subjectivity and kind of a return to subjectivity. Realizing that objectivity is a lie and we are subjective animals that experience phenomena through our bodies. And we're always going to be subjective in that way. Objective truth, there are objective things like fire is hot and water is wet, and laws of physics and things like that. Although maybe, is fire hot, water wet to something, other creature in the universe? I don't know. How do they experience it? We are very much tied to our bodies. And I think that we've always known that we were subjective, and this search for objective truth has created its own sense of delusion. It doesn't mean we shouldn't find out what's rational and true, but we have to acknowledge that at some point we're tribal, subjective animals. And pick a team, and pick your belief system, decide what you care about, and live like every man has for thousands of years who weren't worried about objective truth. We're just worried about living and the things that they cared about. I don't think the idea that every single individual has to be burdened with what is objectively true for all of mankind is a little crazy, really, if you think about it, for these kind of crazy monkeys that we are. So that's really my answer to that, though, is read. It's in the Pater Volume 1, put out by the First Men, The Order of Fire. It's a book that we published together. And this essay that I'm talking about, Descending Odin's Throne, is basically a book in itself. It's like a mini book inside the bigger book. And so he really gets into the weeds of that discussion between objectivity and subjectivity. But there's this idea that we have to measure everything in the modern world, to validate things so that, we can appreciate subjective. I see where you're going with that, but I would just recommend you read C.B. Robertson's essay on that, because that's where we've gotten to in the Order of Fire and solar idealism, is that just kind of embracing our own subjectivity as humans, because that's all that we can ever be. We're never actually objective. That's an illusion. So, I mean, you can write things down on paper, but we see so often how even science, the scientific method, is influenced by external factors, whether it's who's funding studies, what they want to find, the peer review process. Who are your peers? How objective are they? Or are they all just on the same team and want to discover the same answers? Unless there's someone, like, if there's a worldwide consensus that you can't break or you get punished for it, is that even science anymore? So there's so many questions like that. I think that you have to get to a point where there is no objective truth. There are certain facts that they're not undeniable, certain basic things, but when you get into like humans and meaning and so forth, then it gets very murky very quickly. And I think, like I said, like I wrote in Becoming a Barbarian and in other books, we can't think on a scale as grand as people try to think. We're not designed to care about thousands and thousands and billions of people and what they think and feel. So it's best to, I think, put that off to the side and focus on yourself and your environment, what you can care about, the people connected to you, what your values are, what their values are, what is meaningful to all of you, and create your own movement, create your own thing, create your own culture, just like everyone did before us. Most cultures throughout history were not worried about what some other culture far away thought was objective truth. I don't think that is a human thing to really find. So that's my best answer to that. Someone said, it seems like we're entering a new religious epoch. The emergence of Christianity might serve as an example of what will come next. Christianity might have taken root as a transition from an oral to a written religion, and now we are moving from a written religion to one which would be more defined by the internet, ? In your opinion, are technological innovations in media and communication technologies the primary cause of Christianity's withering, and how might they impact a new religion? Well, technology can mean anything. It can mean the first man who picks up a rock and uses it to do something, right? So technology means many things, but I know what you mean in terms of communication technology. And I would say that it goes before that. I think when you talk about Nietzsche and the death of God and the death of consensus, I mean, there's a factor in there that has to do with the printing press and people actually being able to read the Bible. And then when they can read it for themselves, then they have different interpretations. Subjective interpretations even. And then you have schisms. And then, in Nietzsche's time, there's a lot of world travel happening that wasn't happening before. And even more, I mean, I think, I don't know when the Wright brothers compared to Nietzsche is right now off the top of my head, but I think they came later. But, flight really wasn't happening then. Imagine a world inhabited by Nietzsche where you didn't have to get on a train or a boat for months or weeks or months to get somewhere. I mean, and you can just fly to the other side of the world in a day. That travel is kind of a form of communication as well. And now travel happens super fast. Because the thing is, with religions, you have to have some form of, and cultures just generally, you have to have some form of isolation. If you put a whole bunch of people in an isolated space, they'll probably create their own culture and probably their own religion. But you have to leave them in there and let them cook. You gotta let them ferment for a while. And and then they'll come up with their own ways of doing things. I always say that culture begins with inside jokes. but they'll come up with their own belief systems and philosophies and value systems, and some of them will be human because they're humans. There are human universals. I talk about those all the time, and so some of them will be consistent with others, and some of them won't be consistent with other things at all. They'll be their own, idiosyncratic formations, but to really do that, I think you need some kind of social isolation. Now, people can create social isolation, but that's what we call cults. Now, would you they say you're going to be kicked out of the cult if you don't do this, and they become very controlling, which I really think most religions have probably been that way for most of human history. I think about the Mormons. I lived in Utah for a little while, and they're probably the most successful semi-insular, cult, religion, whatever. I don't really make a differentiation between those two. Religion is just a successful cult, and I don't see cult as a bad word. I know it has the connotations of controlling, dominating master, whatever, but generally speaking, that's not what it means in terms of the bigger scope of history. So I think that this communication that you're talking about, in the sharing of information, it needs it breaks up that isolation process. So it makes it hard for people to create this thing that's in this one group of people, because there's constantly new things coming in and out. I mentioned the Mormons. I lost that for a second, but I'm coming back to it. I lived in Utah, and the Mormons, have managed to create that. I mean, they have problems with it too. They have a lot of problems with the outside world getting in. The Amish, all these people, but the Mormons are kind of probably America's most successful cult, but they. I've heard Mormons say that it's socially isolating to live in Utah. I mean, it's very, not that, I'm sorry. I've heard Mormons say that it is oppressive as a Mormon to live in Utah, because everyone knows what you're doing, and people know that if you're not following the rules, and it gets out, and there's rumors and there's gossip, and then they hold it against you, and it's very judgy, and but that's kind of what creating a culture is like. We all have the same values, and they're going to hold each other accountable to those values. If you have a whole bunch of people who just don't care, how do you create a culture from that? You have to have people who they have agreed on a certain set of values, agreed on a certain set of beliefs, and are, draw lines around that. And if you don't have that, then it's very difficult for new religions and cultures to form that are serious. Solar idealism, I think it has many of the features of a religion. It doesn't have the supernatural feature. We leave that optional. But solar idealism, I think, was designed to provide a lot of the benefits and the things that are missing from modern life that religion conveys, without people having to lie to themselves and believe something that they don't actually believe. That is my best pitch for solar idealism, really, is if you don't actually believe what these people telling you about God or gods, but you recognize that there's a desire for a human need, really, for ritual, for myth, for imagination, for a system of ideals, a belief system. Solar idealism provides all that, but we try to leave. We're still in the creation process, and we don't want it to be fixed, because we want to have an open OODA loop. I mean, the OODA loop has to keep going. We don't want it to be just static, where it won't take in new information, because I think that's how it becomes very kind of dead and anachronistic really quickly. And that's where I think Christianity is that it's just anachronistic, and the benefits that it provided are now negatives. If you look at what Christianity really did, it created, from an anthropological perspective, it created a single set of ancestors for all humanity. So in Europe, you had all these tribal cultures, right? And there are all these warring tribal cultures with different religions, different belief systems, different bloodlines, and whatever. And one of the things that you do, and you find this in anthropological studies and so forth, is that if you want to unify two tribes, you make up a common ancestor, because then you're all part of the same family. And that's what people are trying to do. I mean, really, that's what people are trying to do with like something like white nationalism or like other nationalisms. Like, let's decide that we all have this thing in common, even though we're like all these different groups that are competing. Let's pick this one thing that we have in common that makes us all part of one thing. And that's a way to unify groups that are in conflict. So that's something that Christianity did, and I don't know what kind of religion can replace that with technology in the mix that shares information in the same way. But we'll see. I mean, because I do think it's time for new religions and new myths and new ideas and new ideologies. I think we've been rehashing the same garbage for so many years, and you know, it had its time. It ran its course, just like all the other religions have. But I think that you know, how many centuries do we have to talk about this thing that may or may not have even happened, or that, you know, happened but wasn't what they said it was, or whatever. You know, how long do we have to talk of these groups of people in this one region of the world? You know, like, why does it have to be define humanity? It doesn't. I mean, technically there are other religions, you know, many other competing religions have a totally different view of reality. I don't think we need to be stuck with any of them. And the challenge is, with all this new information, new traffic of information, how we create new things. But I think, circling back to the subjectivity discussion that we had, is that people are becoming more okay with being subjective again, because they're less trusting of experts who tell them what objective reality is. So it does open the door to create this weird kind of 1960s, 1910s, 20s kind of vibe where anything's possible. And so I'm looking forward to maybe seeing something new, something creative, something new in the world, new and exciting in the world. So I think that's all the questions I have for this week. This is a long one, but I had a lot of good questions, so I wanted to try and get to all of them. I don't think I missed any of them. I actually recorded this twice because I had some technical difficulties. But anyway, we'll do this again. I'm happy to answer questions. I like doing this. So we'll get back to that. And maybe next month we'll do it again. And you guys can, I'll put up another post, and you guys can keep asking me more questions, because it's fun, and it's a different way to, like, it gives me ideas of, like, hey, what do people want me to talk about? Maybe it gives me a question that I haven't thought about before, and then that's exciting. So thank you guys for all your questions. Thank you for watching this, and until next time, stay solar.